In 1769, a Spaniard named Gaspar de Portola led the first European expedition into the territory of Las Californias, of which Portola was acting governor. Setting out from La Paz on the Bay of California, 3/5 of the expedition sailed, while the other 2/5 marched to San Diego, where they rejoined. By the time the land groups arrived, most of the men from the ships had died, either during the voyage or from illness after they landed. There were barely enough sailors left to crew one of the 3 ships. After resting and regrouping, the remaining able-bodied men marched into the future state of California, reaching as far north as San Francisco Bay. They only meant to go to Monterey Bay, which they found but didn't recognize, a mistake that extended their trip by several weeks and about 140 miles total. Early on in this expedition, on Friday, July 28th, the Spanish passed through a wide, fertile piece of land, bordered on the east by the Santa Ana Mountains, the Pacific Ocean and Catalina Island to the west, and the San Gabriel and Santa Monica Mountains to the north and northwest, respectively. They made camp that Friday on the left bank of the Santa Ana River, across from a Native American village. The chief of the village invited them to come and live with the natives to share the abundant, fruitful land around them. The Spaniards promised they would return and gladly live with them. One interesting detail of this particular day comes from the diary kept by expedition member Friar Juan Crespi. Quote, "I called this place the sweet name of Jesus de los Temblores, because we experienced here a horrifying earthquake, which was repeated 4 times during the day. The first, which was the most violent, happened at 1 in the afternoon, and the last one about 4. The next day, after struggling to cross the river, the Spaniards marched up a nearby hill, where a park exists today. From here, they could see all the land that will be the focus of this story, and more besides. Most of the modern Orange County, with the cities of Anaheim and Buena Park, lay below them, a spread that would eventually contain 2 of the first and most famous theme parks. "14 years after the first Spanish exploration, the entire tract of land we've been describing, from the river to the ocean to the mountains, would be granted by the current governor, under authority of the Spanish King Charles III, to a sergeant and veteran of the Portola expedition named Manuel Nieto. By the time Nieto died in 1804, the Spanish government had split Las Californias into 2 separate jurisdictions, Alta California and Baja California. Nieto's 5 sons and 1 daughter inherited his land grant. 30 years later, the 6 siblings and their heirs split the enormous Rancho de Nieto, now part of the independent country of Mexico, into 6 smaller plots. Of concern to our story is the plot of land taken by Nieto's eldest son, Juan Jose Nieto. This land, over 48,000 acres and the largest of the divided plots, was named Rancho Los Coyotes. 6 years later, he sold Rancho Los Coyotes to Juan Bautista Leandri, an Italian immigrant, and his wife, Maria Francisca Uribe. When Leandri died 15 years later, Maria inherited the land. She remarried, and by the time of the Mexican-American War had sold half the interest in the land to a fascinating, influential figure in California history, Andrés Pico. Shortly after the war ended, and California was transferred to the United States, gold was discovered in Northern California at Sutter's Mill. While the gold rush and 49ers built boom towns in the north, the rancheros of Southern California prospered. The price of cattle went up by almost 2,000% over the following years, as the mining operations up north needed the animals to feed the influx of new labor. But As with the gold rush itself, and as we will see over and over in this story, the boom was followed by a bust. By the time 1851 rolled around, many of the rancheros found themselves in debt, and the price of cattle falling fast enough that they could no longer make ends meet. Enter a man named Abel Stearns. After buying one of the smaller Nieto plots decades ago, Stearns made it rich off the cattle boom. As his neighbors lost money, he made predatory loans to them, often taking their land as collateral. When they finally went under, he would claim their lands and expand his rancho. He did this with Pico's stake in the Rancho Los Coyotes in 1851. In 1860, as the eastern part of the U.S. fractured in two, beginning the first steps to the Civil War, Stearns foreclosed on Doña Uribe's loans and took full control of Rancho Los Coyotes. Within a couple years, Stearns had reunited nearly all of the Nieto lands, and then some. But his own methods came back to haunt him. In 1863 and 64, with the Civil War raging in the eastern part of the country, Californians were dealing with a different kind of battle. Severe drought resulted in the death of thousands of cattle on Stearns' land alone. The next year, after having to take loans to stay afloat, he would lose one of the original Nieto plots to cover a $20,000 debt. As his financial situation grew worse, a friend came to him with a business proposal. Gathering a number of wealthy investors, they would sell off all of Stearns' land, giving him a share of the profits. Stearns agreed, and 3 years after the end of the Civil War, they established a trust company to distribute the parcels. That same year, a 2-year-old girl named Margaret Virginia Doherty arrived in the area with her parents, traveling in a covered wagon. In less than 70 years, her son will come to own the land at the center of our story. But that's for later. For now, in 1885, a Chicago grocery wholesaler named James A. Whitaker bought 690 acres on the north side of the former Rancho Los Coyotes, about 5 miles due west of the little hill where the Portola expedition camped when they first came through the area 116 years prior. Whitaker intended the land for a cattle ranch, but was convinced instead to plot out a town by executives from the Santa Fe Railroad. 2 years later, he filed the township papers in Los Angeles for the town of Buena Park. Whitaker convinced the Santa Fe and Southern Pacific Railroads to build depots in his town, and in 1889 got the Pacific Creamery Company to open a factory producing their Lily Cream products. That same year, 40-odd miles east-northeast, in the town of San Bernardino, Margaret Virginia Knott, née Doherty, gave birth to her first child, a boy named Walter. In the 21 years since she arrived on that covered wagon, she had married a Methodist minister named Elgin Knott, owner of a nearby orange grove, and settled into starting a family. Her second son, Elgin Jr., was born a couple years later, but life was about to upend for Margaret and her sons. Elgin Sr. died on March 31st, 1896, at the age of 37. The single mother and her 2 young sons sold the farm a few years later in late 1899 and moved to nearby Pomona. The 10-year-old Walter helped make ends meet around the house by planting vegetables on empty lots of land and selling the resulting produce door to door. In 1904, Cordelia Hornaday moved to Pomona, California from a small town in eastern Illinois. Her mother had died 3 years ago when she was 11, and Cordy acted as the homemaker for her younger sister while her father worked to support them. 2 years later, as a freshman at Pomona High School, Cordelia met another student, one less than a month older than her, with a similar story, Walter Knott. The two became friends and, eventually, began dating, taking afternoon picnics in the hills above the town. After completing his sophomore year in high school, the last year required by the state of California at the time, Walter moved out to Imperial Valley to work on a farm. After a year there, he leased a 20-acre plot of land with one of his cousins in Coachella Valley, turning it into a profitable vegetable farm. The next year, Walter was back in Pomona working as a construction foreman for a contracting company. Using his savings, Walter built a home at 1040 West 4th Street in Pomona and proposed to Cordelia. They were married in June 1911 and had their first child, a daughter they named Virginia, 2 years later. Maybe it was selling the family farm, the loss of that remaining physical connection to his father who died so young. Or maybe it was all those years growing peas and other vegetables in vacant, unkempt lots and selling the fruits of his labor to support the family. It's hard to say the cause, but Walter's connection to the land of Southern California was undeniably intimate, which makes his next decision seem slightly less insane. In 1913, Walter filed for a homestead on 160 acres of land in the Mojave Desert. The federal government guaranteed to grant ownership of the land if Knott lived there and improved it over a 3-year period. In 1914, the same year World War I started in Europe, Walter convinced Cordy to move more than 80 miles away from their home in Pomona to an adobe house abandoned by the previous tenant on the land, someone who couldn't withstand the 3 years in the desert to get the title to the plot. Walter decided he would farm grapes, and the family sold their house and everything else in Pomona, except their furniture, to fund the new farm. But it's impossible to grow something out of nothing, even for a successful farmer like Knott. There was barely enough water for the family, let alone irrigating crops. The few crops Walter did manage to get to take root were ripped up from the sandy soil by the violent thunderstorms that rolled across the flat desert. Even today, the land the Knotts lived on is bleak and barren, and largely undeveloped. But Walter was determined to earn the land, and so the family stayed on for the next 3 years, adding a son, Russell, in 1916, and another daughter, Rachel, in 1917. Walter worked in the famous Calico mines about 15 miles away as the crow flies, but far enough that, to be on time for his shifts, he had to live in the workhouse built for the miners instead of returning to Cordelia and his children. After becoming suspicious of the company running the mining operation, he took a job with the county building the highway that would one day become part of the world-famous Route 66. Both jobs kept him away from the family and homestead for days at a time, and by the end of the 3-year term, the Knotts were more than ready to get out of the Mojave. As the U.S. entered World War I, the Knotts reached the end of their term, took ownership of their land, and promptly left. Instead of returning to his previous job with the concrete contractor in Pomona, Walter took a job as a tenant farmer for a cattle ranch in the town of Shandon. The land wasn't thought to be very good for farming, and so Walter made a deal with the owners. Any extra vegetables he grew, after the community's ranch hands were fed, he could sell for his own profit. The owners agreed, and the Knotts spent the next few years in Shandon, Walter selling the extra vegetables he grew, and Cordelia selling homemade candy and caring for their 3 kids. By 1920, the couple had $2,500 in savings, about $37,000 today. Walter joined with another cousin named Jim Preston, whose farm in Glendora Walter had worked on as a boy. They leased 20 acres of land to start a berry farm. Once again, the Knotts and their children, Virginia, age 7, Russell, age 4, and Rachel, age 3, packed up and moved to live on this new farm. This new farm was located on Grand Avenue on the southern end of Buena Park, the town founded by James A. Whitaker 33 years ago, 2 years before Walter was born. Over the previous century and a half, this small plot of land had changed from grassland to cattle ranch to frontier town to farmland. It had changed hands through generations of families, through booms and busts, and through the evolution of nations as Spain was replaced by Mexico and then the United States. The man who owned it now was William Coffrin, but even though they didn't own it yet, it was the Knotts' place. The years in the desert had hardened them, and Walter wanted nothing more than to own a farm. No matter what it took, nothing, from bad weather to war to economic collapse, nothing would get the Knotts to give up on their farm. Both Walter and Cordelia would stay there for the rest of their lives. Hey friends, thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video. Here's a couple more you might like. And if you would, please hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up. It literally costs you nothing except a few seconds, and it truly helps us make more videos like this one. An extra special thanks go out to the people helping us over on Patreon. It's because of their support that you're seeing this video right now. If you want to help the channel out even more, head over to our Patreon and check it out. You can find it through a link in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we hope you have a great day.